Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear friends and participants. Welcome to this session of Quran for Teens. We have been studying various surahs of the Quran, and I hope you have been going through these surahs whenever you were able to. The purpose is that the text of the Quran is studied with more detail, and the surah that we're going to study today is Surah Al-Hashr, which is the 59th surah of the Quran. We have been discussing this, that the Quran is divided into 7 chapters, and the chapter that we are currently studying is the 6th chapter. And this 6th chapter actually begins with the Surah Qaf, which is the 50th surah. Also, we have been discussing that surahs are divided into Meccan and Medinan surahs. Each chapter begins with Meccan surahs and it ends on Medinan surahs. So, as far as the Meccan surahs of this particular chapter are concerned, they began with the 50th surah, which is Surah Qaf, and they continued up to the 56th surah, which is Surah Waqia. And these make up 7 surahs. And from 57th surah, which is Surah Hadid, we have now entered into the Medinan surahs, and this section or this chapter will end on these Medinan surahs. And we have studied 2 Medinan surahs earlier on. We have studied Surah Hadid, which is the 57th surah. We have studied Surah Mujadala, which is the 58th surah. And so today we are studying Surah Hashr, which is the 59th surah. Another point that you might want to note is something that I have been telling you all along, and that is, as far as the names of the Quranic surahs are concerned, do remember that they don't reflect the content of a surah. This is not the custom of the Arabs. This is not the way the surahs were named by the Sahaba. They would pick up some word, some important word, some catchword, some unique facet of a surah, and then name it by that particular catchword. So it is the same in this case as well. You see, Surah Hashr means, literally translated, it means fate or the consequence. So because the fate of certain Jewish tribes is mentioned here, so therefore it has been actually selected as the name of the surah. But always remember that this is something which is very different to the way that we work or we compose our writings. We always name surahs by their headings, and those headings actually, or we name our writings with headings in which those headings actually reflect the content. So this is not the case in the Quran. Another thing that you would like to note is that as far as the Quran is concerned, the best way to read the life of the Prophet as well is to read the Quran, because you see, the life of the Prophet is reflected in the whole of the Quran. So in other words, the biography of the Prophet, if you'd like to study that, if you can study the Quran chapter wise, and you'll get to know that how his ministry, how his preaching progressed from the Meccan period into the Medinan period, how he was faced with certain ordeals, how he had to cope with certain remarks that his opponents would give and make fun of, and had certain beliefs. So you'll find the biography of the Prophet as Prophet of God preserved in the Quran in this way. However, his seerah or his biography as a human being, as a person who stood at the pinnacle of humanity, is something that you'll find in bits and pieces in the Quran. But if you'd like to know more about him as a human being, then you'll find a lot of information about him in Hadith narratives. So that is the source of his personal biography, I would say, is biography as a human being. But as you can see, or maybe you will be knowing, that these seerahs or these biographies of Prophet as a human being, they have to be evaluated. All these narratives have to be evaluated in a very, very stringent way, because a lot of things which are reflected as the biography of the Prophet Muhammad as a human being, they have a lot of excesses and a lot of inauthentic information. So I was just making this point that if you'd like to read the prophet, the life of the Prophet as a prophet of God, the best source is the Quran, and reading these chapters chapter wise. And if you'd like to read the biography of the Prophet as a human being, then although you'll find glimpses in the Quran, but the main source are those narratives which the Sahaba or the companions of the Prophet actually reported about him, how he went dealing with his companions and how he dealt with his wives and how he was he represented the highest standards of humanity. Okay, now let's start off by uh, studying our present surah. As I said, this surah is a Medinan surah, and you'd perhaps also like to know that as far as this surah is concerned, this surah actually addresses the hypocrites which had infiltrated in the ranks of the Muslims, and they had actually become a source of nuisance as well. And what they would do is that they would plan secret missions in the ranks of the Muslims, and this would happen mostly because they thought that as far as the future of Islam is concerned and the future of the non-Islamic forces are concerned, it hands in the balance. And they thought that, well, we just cannot we just cannot be on the side of one of these forces because we don't know which one of them is going to prevail. So what they would do is that they would make friends with both, and this would actually make them this would classify them as hypocrites because they would be in the ranks of both these denominations, and they would obviously uh, pick up a lot of conversations from here and there and report them, and at the same time they would also plan all sorts of mischiefs. So we now begin this surah, and as we go along, I'll try to explain it to you. So the first paragraph is سبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم هو الذي أخرج الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب من ديارهم لأول الحشر ما ظننتم أن يخرجوا وظنوا أنهم مانعتهم حصونهم من الله فأتاهم الله من حيث لم يحتسبوا وقذف في قلوبهم الرعب يخربون بيوتهم بأيديهم وأيدي المؤمنين فاعتبروا يا أولي الأبصار.
Alaikum participants. Zoha, if you can read the translation of these verses. Thank you.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the ever merciful. Every object in the heavens and the earth has glorified God, and He alone is mighty and wise. It is He who has driven out the disbelievers among the people of the book from their dwellings for their first faith. You never thought that they would go out in this manner, and they also thought that their force would protect them from the punishment of God. But God came upon them from where they did not even expect, and He struck terror in their hearts. They were destroying their dwellings by their own hands and also by the hands of the Muslims. So learn from the example. O you who have eyes.
Thank you, Zoha, for this reading. So you can see that there is an incident mentioned in this paragraph, and this actually relates to the Jewish tribe of Banu Nazir. So Banu Nazir was a tribe who populated Medina actually, and they were guilty of a breach, and they had also plotted to kill the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they never succeeded. So they were told that Prophet gave them this permission that they can take along with them whatever they have, whatever they would like, and whatever they can carry. And of course, this was not sufficient because there were so many things that they had in their houses and all their orchards, and they could just carry whatever they could. And so, therefore, this was like saying something that they were destroying their own dwellings by their own hands and also by the hands of the Muslims, because, of course, whatever remained had to come into the possession of the Muslims. So, this Jewish tribe of Banu Nazir, before expelling this Banu Nazir tribe, the Banu Qainuqa, who were another tribe of the Jewish tribe, remember Medina was populated by Jews. And when the Prophet had come over to Medina, he had made this covenant, a lot of agreements with the Jews, and as a result, they were bound in a certain agreement. But when they started to break these agreements, and especially in this case, the Banu Nazir, as I said, they even plotted to kill Prophet Muhammad. So they were asked to leave Medina, and they were told that they can take along whatever they have, and that is it, and leave the rest, whatever they can, and leave the rest in their houses, and they would come into the possession of these Muslims. So the last words, as you can see, are "Fa'tabiru ya ulil absar." So learn from their example, oh you who have eyes. So this is basically uh, uh, caution being sounded to the hypocrites, and they are being told that look what has happened to a Jewish tribe who were guilty of plotting against the prophet, and their own fate or the fate of the hypocrites would be no different. So they have to learn from this, and they must be devotedly and sincerely accepting Islam instead of remaining in a situation in which they are connected to both. They're wavering on both sides. They're part of the Jews as well, and they are part of Muslims as well, all secretively. And this is not the right attitude. So these were the munafiqun or the hypocrites which are had been addressed. Okay. ولولا أن كتب الله عليهم الجلاء لعذبهم في الدنيا ولهم في الآخرة عذاب النار ذلك بأنهم شاقوا الله ورسوله ومن يشاق الله فإن الله شديد العقاب.
Umar, can you read the translation of these verses?
And had God not destined exile for them like this from place to place, he would have punished them right in this world. And in the hereafter, there already is the punishment of hell for them. All this is because they have tried to oppose God and His Messenger, and those who oppose God reach the very faith, because God is stern in retribution.
Thank you, Umar. So here, actually, we are being informed that for these Jewish tribes, there was no final punishment in this world. They were not wiped off, as was the case in the previous nations. They were kept until the day of judgment, but the punishment of exile was imposed on them because they had denied a prophet of God, and as not only a nation but a nation which existed for a couple of 2,000 years, in fact, and they were guilty of denying the prophets of God. And so, when ultimately they denied Jesus, they were given this punishment that they would remain in this world, but they would have to go from one place to another. They would have to submit to other people. They would have to remain in exile. So this is precisely what is mentioned here, that God would have punished them right in this world had this punishment of exile had not been destined for them. And this is because they had been they had shown a lot of animosity to God and His messenger, and then it is said that those who oppose God reach this very fate. So basically, remember that what we're talking about since the beginning of the surah is that God Almighty is actually addressing these hypocrites who had infiltrated in the in the ranks of Muslims, and they are being told that look what has happened to this Jewish tribe of Banu Nazir. And as far as their fate is concerned, they would have been wiped out, and they would have been humiliated in this world. But the Almighty has other plans for them, and the nature of their punishment is that they will exist till the day of judgment. They will continue, but they will always be on the move, and they'll be here and in there, and one place and then in another place, and they will not be able to actually uh, stay at one place. And there will always be a time whenever they gather at one place, uh, some situation will arise, circumstances will arise, and they'll have to vacate that place very soon as well. Okay. ما قطعتم من لينة أو تركتموها قائمة على أصولها فبإذن الله وليخزي الفاسقين.
Sinu, it's your turn.
If they hold an objection, do not give ear to them, because the palm trees you cut down or let them standing on their roots at the time of their attack was because of God's directive, and this happened because He may humiliate these defiant.
Defined. Okay, so thank you for that, Simar. This verse is the continuation of the previous subject, and that was that when the Banu Nazir were ordered to vacate Medina, and then they did not do so, the Prophet actually surrounded them, and he had to attack them. And when this attack took place, actually, what happened was that certain palm trees had to be cut down, and others had to be left standing because they were coming in the way. And these people actually launched a propaganda, and they said, well, look at this person. He is after cutting these trees, and which is something very unbecoming. Why should you cut off these trees? Because this is something which is against human nature, that you actually uh, swell your anger on things which are coming on in your way, and they're causing any hindrance. So it was just like a propaganda that they had launched, and they are told that well, this happened because of God's directive. And this happened because God had decided to humiliate them, and therefore they should not put forward any excuse in this regard. Now, this paragraph actually again is a continuation of what we were just discussing regarding the attack on the Banu Nazir. So it says, وَمَا أَفَاءَ اللَّهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ مِنْهُمْ فَمَا أَوْجَفْتُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ خَيْلٍ وَلَا رِكَابٍ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يُسَلِّطُ رُسُلَهُ عَلَى مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ مَا أَفَاءَ اللَّهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْقُرَى فلله وللرسول ولذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم وما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتهوا واتقوا الله إن الله شديد العقاب للفقراء المهاجرين الذين أخرجوا من ديارهم وأموالهم يبتغون فضلا من الله ورضوانا وينصرون الله ورسوله أولئك هم الصادقون.
Zoya Barni, please go ahead and read the translation.
And if the hypocrites ask, tell them, whatever wealth God returned from these Jews to his messenger, you spurred neither horse nor camel on them, that you may stake a claim to it. It is in fact God who gives messengers authority over whomsoever he desires, and God has power over all things. For this reason, whatever God returns from these town dwellers to his messenger shall remain specifically for only the rich, or for
For
God, the
God.
messenger, the kinfolk, the orphan, the destitute, and the traveler, so that it does not circulate only in the rich among you. And the status of the messenger is such that whatever he gives you, accept it, and whatever he forbids you, abstain from it, and keep fearing God. Indeed, God is stern in retribution. This is especially for those poor immigrants who have been driven out of their homes and their properties. They have come seeking God's bounty and pleasure and to support God and his messenger. These are, in fact, the truthful.
So, Jazakallah, thank you, Zoya, for this reading. Okay, this issue arose in the right after that battle, because actually the battle never took place when the Prophet actually showed his intent that he would attack. This Jewish tribe of Banu Nazir, they got scared and they just vacated Medina. And when this happened, of course, there was a lot of war booty, I would say, or the spoils of war, which came into the possession of the Muslims. So these hypocrites actually objected and said, well, if these spoils of war have been obtained, then they should be distributed in the army, because this was the custom in the times of Prophet and before that, that the warring people or the warriors, they would get a share in the spoils of war. And the reason was that there was no standing army, and whenever there would be an attack or a scene of similar sort, people would just gather, and one of the incentives that they would have is that they would have war booty or the spoils of war with them if they won the war. So these hypocrites actually came to the Prophet and said, well, why is it that this war booty is not being distributed amongst the warriors? Because it is they who had actually made this achievement. And it is replied to them that, well, this never happened, that any war was actually waged. Neither horse nor any camel was spurred, which means that none of these events took place. It was not that any attack was formally made, because as soon as this threat came along, the Banu Nazir got so scared that when they saw the army approaching, they just left their places. They are being told that as far as the spoils of war are concerned, they will not be distributed, because the army played no role. It was purely the Almighty Himself who overawed the enemy and made it leave that place. So therefore, it shall not be distributed among the army, and it shall be deposited in the public treasury. And then, as a principal statement is made that if this is not done, then what will happen is كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةٌ بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ, that if this is not distributed, then what will happen is that this wealth will remain only among the rich. It shall not be circulated among the underprivileged, because of course it would be distributed in this way. So therefore, if your Prophet is stopping you from something, then you must learn that this is something that you must be stopped from. And then they are told that, look, if you want to know that what exactly is going to be the use of this wealth which has been obtained without any attack, it shall belong to those immigrants who are migrating from Mecca into Medina, they have been expelled from their homes because of the fact that they wanted to support God and His Messenger. They wanted to seek His bounty, and they were very well off. They were well placed in Mecca. They had their own houses, and now that they have been pushed to this to leave their places and dwell into a new city, which is the city of Medina. So whatever wealth and whatever war bounty has been obtained is going to be for them. And of course, before that is spelled out, we have a whole bunch of heads which have been spelled out, and that they are that it shall belong to God. Of course, that would mean for the cause of God, all the wealth that has been obtained, it shall be expended for the cause of religion, of course, and then for the Prophet. So remember, the source of income of the Prophet was these war booties, because he was as the head of the Muslims, he was not required to work, and the way that he would financially support themselves of himself or and his family was that the Almighty had actually made this arrangement that all a certain amount of war booty shall be distributed amongst the mujahideen, with the warriors, and the Prophet himself as well. So they are being told that this is for Wali Rasul, and then the other heads which are being talked about are Zil Qurba, which means the kinfolk, and then the orphans and the needy and the traveler. So all the war booty which is obtained is is in fact going for this public cause, and of course for those migrants as well who are now migrating from Mecca into Medina. So this is basically an answer to the objection which the hypocrites had raised, that why is it that the wealth is not being distributed among the warriors? So they are being told that there was no war in the first place, and whenever there is no war, then this is the situation that whatever war bounty is obtained is reserved for these causes which have just been mentioned here. Okay. وَالَّذِينَ تَبَوَّأُوا الدَّارَ وَالْإِيمَانَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ فِي صُدُورِهِمْ. So the fee has to be separated from the na. So لا يجدون في صدورهم حاجة مما أوتوا ويؤثرون على أنفسهم ولو كان بهم خصاصة ومن يوق شح نفسه فأولئك هم المفلحون.
Sine, it's your turn.
Contrary to these hypocrites, those who have already made this land a piece of residence and have firmly rooted their faith love those who are migrating to them, now after them, and do not feel any ill will in their hearts on whatever is being given to these immigrants, and they give them preference over themselves even if they are in want. In reality, those who have been protected from selfishness, it is they who shall succeed.
Thank you, Sine. So again, some further explanation is being offered here, that again that the booty which was obtained as a result of that skirmish, which actually never took place, is also for those people who had migrated earlier on. So you see, there were migrants coming earlier on who had migrated very earlier on, and there were other migrants who came later on. So previously, we are told that the migrants who are now coming shall be given this war booty, and now we are told that even though they who were already there, who had already stationed themselves, because they were the ones who had come out from Mecca in the very initial stage, so they will also be given this. And then one of the things that is told is that as far as anything which is given to these migrants is concerned, the people who live in Medina, of course, referring to the Ansar, they don't feel any ill will against them, because when they think that they are being given sort of a preference, because they are being accommodated, they are being financially taken care of. But on the other hand, the people who are already living there, of course, they were the Ansar, and regarding them, it is said that they don't feel any ill will regarding this whole issue. For as far as they themselves are concerned, they are ones who give preference to others over their own needs, even if they are in want, even if they don't have enough for them, even if they have to make some sacrifice. So the people who are already living there, they don't feel any ill will if that war booty is distributed amongst the migrants in this manner. And again, the last verse is something of an eye opener. It says, or the last part of this verse is, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. in reality, those who have been protected from selfishness, it is they who shall succeed. So one of the most powerful messages that the Quran gives here is that to protect yourself from selfishness, you think of others instead of selfishness. It is selflessness that has to be your motto. And one thing that, as we go on in the surah, I'd like to point out here during our reading is that you might have noted this, that the Quran is actually describing the preaching of the Prophet in a certain way. And this description, you can see, relates to the biography of the Prophet, the way he was faced with a lot of problems when he went to Medina. He was faced with these warring Jewish tribes who had actually made a pact with him, that they of a no war pact, in fact. But in spite of making that pact, they went back on their words. They even plotted to kill the Prophet, and then this action had to be taken against them. So you see, what I'd like to point out here is that when you're reading the Quran, you must always understand that what the Quran is going to present to you in each surah is some part of the prophetic ministry, some part of his preaching mission. And this is essential to know, because unless you know what genre the Quran belongs to, or what content it is actually displaying for us, we tend to expect something different, and we lose that hope that maybe something which is more relevant to us is going to be talked about. But we have to understand that this relevance has to be something that we must understand indirectly. So you see, a lot of guidance that we need, God has already blessed us with that guidance innately. So good and evil are already known to us. So after that, what remains is our connection with God, or certain things in which we would like to have the right course. It is only in such areas that the Almighty has guided us and given us certain directives, and they are very far and few. So mostly you'll read in the Quran the story of Prophet Muhammad, the way he undertook that mission, and how that mission treated him. And as a result, the Sharia, or the directives that he gave us, as I said, which are very few, they'll come interspersed with these anecdotes. So it's not that there is a chapter on the directives of Islam, or a chapter on certain things. No, it's like reading the biography of the Prophet in the Quran, and then things which relate to us, they come within that narrative, and within that anecdote, you'll find certain things which relate to you. So you have to be on the lookout. And here, particularly, you can see that there was a verse which, of course, is something which is related to us as well. And I'm talking about something that we just read a couple of paragraphs earlier. It said, "Wama atakum rasulu fakhuzuhu wama nahakum anhu fantahu," which means that whatever the Prophet gives you, accept it, and whatever he stops you from, abstain from it. So again, this gives us that although it was addressed to the hypocrites of those times, they were told that he has been, if they are being told that none of this war booty is going to belong to them, because of the fact that it was God and the Prophet himself, or in fact it was God who overawed the enemy, and it was not that they had fought themselves and therefore they deserve any war booty. So then a principal statement is made, and that is that whatever the Prophet gives you, you have to accept it, which actually points to the authority of Prophet Muhammad, and tells us that how important it is to obey whatever he says. But again, whatever he says is something that has to be established beyond doubt, that this is what he actually said. So this is the principal thing that we can gauge. And the reason that I had to stop and explain it to you is, again, the fact that whenever you read the Quran, always look for those principal statements within that narrative, because that narrative is going to go along with the life of the Prophet. And within that narrative, you'll find things that are going to relate directly to us. Okay, now let's move back and go back to the text that we were reading. والذين جاءوا من بعدهم يقولون ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم.
Fine, it's your turn.
And these who have come after them also pray, Lord, forgive us and all our brothers who took lead from us in embracing faith, and let not malice arise in our hearts for these believers. Lord, you are very compassionate, ever merciful.
Thank you, Simon, for this. So you see, now a further explanation is made, and that is that this is also this a statement of the people who had actually come after them. later. And they said that please forgive our brothers and who took lead from us in embracing faith. So remember, there was this sequence in which people were coming from Mecca, they were migrating from Mecca, and when they were coming from Mecca to Medina, of course, there were certain people who were there already. So about them, it is being told that people who migrate later, they don't have any malice for those who had migrated earlier. They are very, very generous and large-hearted, and they don't feel any ill will against them, because, of course, you see, this could be a point of jealousy in a person, and it easily arise when we see that where people are very more, they are even more committed to God than we are, and this could have raised certain amounts of jealousy in them, but it never did. And this, instead of being jealous of people who had migrated earlier and being foremost in this migration, they are the ones who came later actually said, well, God forgive us for this, and we have no malice for our brethren who had migrated earlier, and this is something that we would like to actually have, that our hearts are absolutely devoid of this malice. And this is a beautiful prayer also, which we can learn for our own selves as well, because it tells us that we are people who do not have any meanness or any malice for our brethren, and we have magnanimity in us. We would like to show this magnanimity. So basically, it's a prayer to the Almighty to make us people who have that magnanimity. And you would do well, perhaps, to learn this supplication, I would say, by heart, especially in this month of Ramadan. Okay, so now we come to another similar incident, and this is now involving another Jewish tribe. And it says, Alam tara ila allazina nafaqu yaquluna li ikhwanihim allazina kafaru min ahli alkitab la in ukhrijtum lanakhrujanna ma'akum wa la nuti'u fikum ahadan abada wa in qutiltum lanansurannakum wallahu yashhadu innahum lakazibun la in ukhriju la yakhrujuna ma'ahum wa la in qutilu لا ينصرونهم ولئن نصروهم ليولن الأدبار ثم لا ينصرون.
Rayan, please go ahead.
Have you not seen those incriminated with hypocrisy? They say to their brothers from among the people of the book who have rejected the messenger and are now among those who remain. If you are driven out, we shall at all costs go out with you, and we shall not obey anyone against you. And if war is waged against you, we shall certainly help you. But God bears witness that they are absolute liars. If they are driven out, they will certainly not go out with them, and if they are attacked, they will certainly not help them. And if suppose they do not help them, then they will certainly turn their backs. Then they will not find help from anywhere.
Thank you, Rayan. So you see, now comes the case of another Jewish tribe, and they were the earlier we were talking about Banu Nazir, and now we're talking about the Banu Qurayza. So these were the Jewish tribes who inhabited Medina, and they were once again guilty of breach of certain promises they had made, the pact that they had made, and these Jews were, of course, once again they were at the receiving end, and these hypocrites had told them, these brothers from the people of the book, that, well, if you are driven out from Medina like your previous brethren, the Banu Nazir, don't worry, we will be with you. So it's like the hypocrites giving them assurance that if this happens to you, we'll be with you, we'll help you out. But God Almighty is saying that these are absolute liars. Don't think that they are going to help you if you are driven out, because if they are attacked, they will certainly not help you. And if you suppose they do help them, then you will see that they actually just fly, they just run away, they just escape from the battlefield, and this is not going to happen. So basically, they are being told that these hypocrites, they are not sincere to you as well. If they have come from your original language, remember, most of most of these hypocrites were from the Jews, and when they had infiltrated within the ranks of the Muslims, of course, they made them believe that they are Muslims, but of course, they were not so. And to the Jews themselves, they said, well, if there is any need for you, that we help you if you are actually once again expelled, as was the case with Banu Qurayza. We remember that their incident took place in just after the Battle of Ditch, the Battle of Khandaq, and they were also told I mean, in fact, before even their case was decided, it was basically given to Saad bin Muaz, one of the allies, one of their allies, and he was told actually to judge regarding their own policies of treason and breaking all their promises. So something which the Prophet never did himself. So basically, Saad bin Muaz, one of the leaders of the Ansar, they were given this. He was given this position to decide between their fate. But the point that is being made here is that these hypocrites are faithful to none of them, and therefore this is something which will happen. And God says the words which are used are "Wallahu yashhadu innahum lakazibun." God bears witness that they are liars. If they are today assuring you that they'll be with you, that's not going to happen. لأنتم أشد رهبة في صدورهم من الله ذلك بأنهم قوم لا يفقهون لا يقاتلونكم جميعا إلا في قرى محصنة أو من وراء جدر بأسهم بينهم شديد تحسبهم جميعا وقلوبهم شتى ذلك بأنهم قوم لا يعقلون.
Raheel, it's your turn.
They dread you more in their hearts than God because they are a people devoid of understanding. They will never unite in a battlefield to wage war against you. In fact, they will wage war while being stationed in fortified cities or from behind walls. Great is their enmity against one another. You regard them to be united, yet their hearts are divided because they do not use their intellect.
So you can see that once again it is being pointed out that these Jews they might seem united against the Prophet, but in fact they are at loggerheads with each other. They are daggers drawn with each other. They are not united, and they are very afraid. And an outsider would regard them that they are united, but as the verse says, وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى, that their hearts are divided, and the reason is ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. And this is something very important. It says that they do not use their intellect, because had they used their intellect, they wouldn't have reached this fate. Using their intellect would have, of course, meant that they were waiting for a prophet of God. Their own scriptures were actually vouching for the fact that there is going to be a final prophet of God who is going to come from them, the Ishmaelites, who are their cousins. And had they used their intellect and seen how the predictions have come true, predictions of their own books have come true, and how a prophet of God has come to them, they wouldn't have reached this fate. And so, this is all important here to realize that the Quran actually says that people who do not use their intellect generally, they are either blind followers or they are driven by their interests and they are totally blinded by their interests. They generally reach this fate. Okay, كَمَثَلِ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ قَرِيبًا ذَاقُوا وَبَالَ أَمْرِهِمْ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ كَمَثَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ إِذْ قَالَ لِلْإِنسَانِ اكْفُرْ فَلَمَّا كَفَرَ قَالَ إِنِّي بَرِيءٌ مِنْكَ إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهَ رَبَّ الْعَالَمِينَ فَكَانَ عَاقِبَتَهُمَا فِي النَّارِ خَالِدَيْنِ فِيهَا وَذَلِكَ جَزَاءُ الظَّالِمِينَ.
Muhammad Ahmed, it's your turn.
Those whom they are luring will also end up with the same fate as those who have recently tasted the fruit of their own deeds, and a woeful punishment awaits them ahead. They are just like Satan, who says to man, "Become a disbeliever," and when he becomes a disbeliever, he says, "I disown you, I fear God, Lord of the worlds." Therefore, the fate of both is that they will go to hell, where they will remain forever, and such is the punishment of the wrongdoers.
Thank you very much, Muhammad Ahmed. Thank you very much. So they are being told that don't think that this is just your fate. A similar fate actually was met by the Banu Nazir, who had been expelled and who have been mentioned very earlier on in the surah, just as we had started the surah. Remember, so it is said that this is something. This is a fate that they will reach, just as those before them had reached, who had gone through that woeful punishment in which they were told to take whatever they could on camelbacks, and that is it. And they were left. They had left a lot of their assets and wealth in Medina, which were then taken over by the Muslims. And it is said that, well, what happens is that this is how Satan also operates. he actually whispers evil suggestions to people. For example, he says to man that you become a disbeliever. And when he becomes a disbeliever, he says, I disown you. I fear God, Lord of the worlds. So this is what is going to happen to these Jews as well. If they are being told that hypocrites are going to be of help to them, don't count on their help, because this is not going to happen. This is Satan's ploy. Just as Satan incites people or whispers suggestions, and when the time comes for his help, he just withdraws. So it is told here that similarly, these hypocrites will just show their backs. They are not going to be of any help, and you have to remain aware of them. And therefore, fakana aqibatahuma annahuma finnar. And this, therefore, the fate of both is that they will go to hell. When a person who is led by Satan and the person and Satan himself, both are going to reach this fate. And this is exactly the same situation which has arisen here as well. And such is the punishment of the wrongdoers, as is mentioned in the last part. Okay, now the surah shifts and addresses the last part actually addresses weak Muslims, and of course, it tells them how they have to behave in this regard. So the words are Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat lighad wattaqullaha innallaha khabirum bima ta'malun ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون.
Manahil, please read the translation.
All those who lay claim to faith, fear God and let every soul from among you fully evaluate what he has done for tomorrow. Evaluate it and keep fearing God. God surely is aware of all of your deeds. Be not like those who forget God, and God made them forget themselves. In reality, it is they who are disobedient.
Thank you, Manahil. So you see, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, the address actually shows that once again these hypocrites and these weak Muslims are being addressed, and they're being told that although you have staked your claim to be believers, but the thing is that you seldom think of the future, and let every soul fear that there is something that he or she will have to be held accountable when the hereafter comes. So always be worried about your future. So, ma qaddamat lighad, whatever you have sent for tomorrow, remember the deeds that you will do are the ones that are going to make or break you. So it says, wattaqullah, fear God, because God knows what you would be doing. All your deeds are known to Him. And don't be like people who actually forgot God and God made them forget themselves. So this is a punishment which God gives to people. If they forget God, then they actually forget their own selves, which actually means that they forget their own stature as a human being, and they forget what purpose were they sent for. They forget what their objective in life is, and all this actually makes them lose their stature as a human being. And this is a punishment basically from God, and something which we all must seek refuge with God from, because if we start forgetting God, then this is how God makes us forget our own selves. In reality, it is they who are the disobedient. So, although of course in context this is being said of the hypocrites, but again the slant is there, the lesson is there to be learned, and that is forgetting God actually would end up making ourselves forget us. Okay. لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون.
Okay, I'll move on to Hassan.
The companions of hell and the companions of paradise shall never be held equal. It is only companions of paradise who shall succeed.
Yes, continue.
Their hearts are harder than stones. Otherwise, in reality, had we brought down this Qur'an on a mountain, you would have seen it humbling itself and breaking asunder by the fear of God. We mention such examples for people so that they
Thank you, Hassan. Okay, so you see, once again, these people are being warned that don't think that people here in this world, if they behave differently, and if they are people who, on the one hand, are pious, and then we have other people who are impious or people who are evil. They'll end up with the same fate. This is not going to happen. In the hereafter, people of the companions of the fire and the companions of paradise, they are going to be separate. They are not going to be equal. And as far as the companions of hell are concerned, they are going to be the losers. And the companion of the paradise, they are going to be the people who shall succeed. So don't think that this world, the way people exist in this world, good and evil are not at times called to account, and they are not, they don't have the same fate. This is not going to be the case in the hereafter, because in the hereafter, people shall be lined up and divided according to their deeds. And also, they are told that as far as the Quran is concerned, it is calling them to something which is so close to their hearts, which is so something which should melt their hearts. But look at these people that their hearts have turned harder than stones, and they don't actually have the Quran does not have any impact on them. And such is the profundity of the Quran's impact that had it been revealed on a mountain, that mountain would have been crushed to pieces. And look at these people that their hearts are so hard that it is having no effect on them. So you see, basically, it is telling us that how hard these people had become, that even the Quran was not being able to melt their hearts. Some Quran which could have shattered to pieces the mountains was not able to penetrate and infiltrate into their hearts simply because of their own attitude. So there is nothing wrong with the Quran. There is, of course, a lot of wrong which is in their hearts, that they are not allowing the Quran to make its way into their hearts. And then the Quran says, وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. We mentioned such examples for people so that they reflect. Again, this, of course, is an example, a hypothetical example, that if the Quran had been revealed to a mountain, the mountain would have not been able to bear this burden. But look at these people; they are not even they are not even they don't even care what's going on. The Quran has absolutely been not able to make an impact. Again, letting us know and telling us know how hard their hearts have become. Huwallahu allazi la ilaha illa. So we are now coming to the end of the surah, and this actually end is a very comprehensive note on the attributes of God. So if you'd like introduction to God, and I think we have studied this portion somewhere earlier as well, because this is one of the best introductions to God Himself through His attributes. And this introduction, you'll see, is so comprehensive that almost you'll not find any other place in the Quran in which so many attributes of God are mentioned in one place, which of course are able to give us a very profound picture of God Himself. So the words are, هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم.
Fatma Hussain, please read the translation.
They should always keep in mind that it is God besides whom there is no deity, no, nor of the unseen and the seen. He is the most compassionate, the ever merciful. He is the very God besides whom there is no deity, the sovereign Lord, the holy, the embodiment of peace, the giver of tranquility, the guardian, the mighty, the extremely powerful. The most is high, exalted is God above what they state as partners. He is God, the designer, the creator, the shaper. All good names are His. All that is in the heavens and the earth glorify Him, and He is the mighty, the wise.
Thank you, Fatima, for reading this out. So you see, all these attributes of God make Him someone that we can relate ourselves to. So the first thing which is stated is that there is no God, there is no deity except Him. Of course, something that is of supreme importance, that God is alone, He has no peer. There is no one else who can have the same attributes of God. He has no partners, and this is, of course, what we call as monotheism. And this has been especially stressed in the whole of the Quran, because remember, when the Quran was being revealed, there were a lot of people who had indulged in various forms of polytheism, whether this was overt or whether it was covert. So you see, the idolaters, they were declared, they had declared themselves to be polytheists, whilst the Jews and the Christians of the times of Prophet Muhammad, they were also incriminated with various forms of polytheism. Thus, for example, Jesus was regarded as the Son of God, and the Jews of Arabia had regarded Ezra to be the Son of God. So both of them, of course, they had their own share in these polytheistic practices. So it is stressed time and again that there is no God but God. And then he is alimul ghaibi wa shahada, which of course means that he knows what is not known to people, and he knows what is known to people. So this is something which is spoken with relation to mankind. Whatever people know is known to him, and whatever they don't know is also known to him. And this is of course also translated as whatever the unseen is, the unseen world or the unknown world could be unknown to human beings, but it is not unknown to God. He is the most compassionate, the ever merciful. Now, there's a difference between Rahman and Rahim. So you see, Rahman and Rahim, although they come from the same root word meaning mercy, but there is a difference between the two. Rahman means that that mercy has uh, a lot of electrification in it. For example, it has a lot of power behind it. It's something which relates to us like a fountain does. It bursts forth. And Rahim is something which tells us that God's mercy is not temporary. It is eternal, because you see, when something bursts forth like a fountain, it sort of dissipates after some time. But this is not the case with God. His mercy is there all the while, but it's not going to just waste away. It's going to be there for us. So the word Rahim actually tells us that this mercy is going to stay forever. It's not just going to dissipate. Uh, and then it says that once again, of course, that those words are repeated, in which God's oneness is once again referred to, and then it is said that God is a sovereign. There is no other person who can be his peer. He is Al Quddus, which means that he is the holy. And if he is the holy, which means that he has all positive attributes, he would like a reflection of his attributes in his creatures as well. So they should also try and make themselves pure and try to get rid of their bad habits. So remember, all these attributes of God, when we are informed those attributes, so one of the reasons of informing them is that God has these attributes in their ultimate extent. But as far as we creatures are concerned, because we are a reflection of God on a very small scale, so it is required that we also have these attributes in ourselves, although at a very small level, except there are certain exceptions that we are just going to talk about. So the other thing is now said is that he is the embodiment of peace. He wards off the attacks of Satan. He is someone who is our protector. And if we rely on him, Satan is not going to bother us. So he is the embodiment of peace. Therefore, he'll make us peaceful as well. And then he's the giver of tranquility. Again, something what we call as peace of mind, something that we call as mental comfort. If we rely on God, we'll find ourselves to be people who have that mental solace and that mental peace. And then he is Al-Muhaymin, which means that he's our guardian. He guards us, he protects us from evil forces if we actually seek his refuge. And then he is the mighty, Al-Aziz, and Al-Jabbar, the extremely powerful, which means that there's nothing who is going to stop him if he would like to implement his will. He is someone that we should seek support in. And if we seek support in God, remember, this support is going to be eternal, because this is the support of an all powerful and extremely exalted and very high being, and we can count upon him. And then he is Al Mutakabbir, which means that he is exalted, again, referring to the fact that there is no one who has more authority and more power than him, and therefore it is befitting to call him as Mutakabbir. Although this is something which would be a wrong thing to attribute a human being for, because only God can be called al-mutakabbir, a person who is most high and exalted. So people, if they themselves call them to be mutakabbir, then they would be breaching this thing. And so you can see that although these attributes make us think that we have to be a reflection of the attributes of God, but then there are certain exceptions, like, for example, Al-Mutakabbir. We cannot be Al-Mutakabbir. God has the right to be Al-Mutakabbir because He is, in fact, the Most High. And then the verse continues, or the section continues, and says that God is the designer. He is the one who plans, then He creates, and then He perfects. So remember all the creation that is taking place and the tremendous power of creativity that we are witnessing is from God. He designs us, He creates us, and then He perfects us. And all good names are His. And everyone in the heavens and the earth, they give glory to Him, they glorify Him, even the birds, all sorts of living beings in the heavens and the earth, and even things that we call as inanimate things or non-living things. The Quran tells us that they could be non-living to us, but these non-living things, they even glorify God in their own ways, and we might be not acquainted with those ways. And then the last of these attributes is Wahuwal Azizul Hakim. He is the mighty and the wise. Once again, telling us that all of God's works have wisdom behind it. If there is some temporary delay, if there is something which we might not like, we must think that it must be a blessing in disguise, because God is wise. He does not wish evil, or He does not ill wish for us. He is someone who would always like us to prosper. But if there is a delay in His mercy, then there is some reason. For example, one of the reasons could be that He wants to test our mettle. And another reason could be that He wants us to be stronger than before. So remember, trials and adverse circumstances, they make you powerful, more stronger than before. They call upon your reserves, they call upon your latent abilities. And at the same time, certain trials, they actually, if you succeed in those trials, there's all the more chance that you will succeed in greater trials, because they build your resilience. They are also a means of bringing you closer to God. So you can see how the surah actually ends on the note that it had started. Remember, it had started with the words "Sabbaha lillahi ma fis samawat." Everything gives glory. Everything in the heavens and the earth gives glory to God. And you see that how the surah actually converges on the same theme with which it started. And just to make this point once again, that remember that whenever you're studying a Quranic surah, it will belong to one or the other phase of Prophet Muhammad's mission. And the phase that we studied today actually belonged to the Medinan phase, to the Medinan ministry time, because it was here that he had encountered the Jews of Banu Nazir and the Banu Qurayza. They had actually breached their covenants, and they were therefore dealt with. So there was a 10-year pact which was between them. For some it was 10 years, some it was less than that, but they were all bound in a certain contract, and it was those people who had actually breached that contract one after the other, and then they had to be taken to task. So you see, this is how the build up is taking place, and we'll see that as this chapter progresses, the sixth chapter of the Quran, how ultimately the Prophet Muhammad's ministry is going to end on certain measures that he had adopted, which of course were part of the divine scheme. So we now come to an end to this study. Thank you very much for being with me in this reading. If you have any questions, do let me know. Otherwise, I would like to ask some questions.
Dr. Shehzad, I have a request from Facebook, and participant is saying that if you can briefly explain the reason for the wars that were happening by the swords of Prophet and his companion, peace be upon him. And it's probably referring to the Allah's law or the Sunnat Allah.
So we have been discussing this in various surahs as well, and earlier on, that you see there is a certain law of God, and that is that in order to make the accountability of the hereafter a palpable reality, something that we can see ourselves, He creates lesser days of judgment on earth. So there is this greater day of judgment which is going to take place, of course, when the hereafter comes. But before it comes, the Almighty arranges to make those lesser day of judgments happen in the times of His messengers. And what is actually brought forth on those days is that God implements reward and punishment like the very way He would do in the hereafter. So people First of all, they are told that they are now addressed. They are now being addressed by God's representative, who is the messenger himself. God's representative is someone who is going to clear their misconceptions, who is going to tell them what truth is. And if they become convinced of the truth and they still deny the truth, then they are told that they shall be punished in this world. So basically, as far as these wars are concerned, they are not wars for the sake of converting people to Islam forcibly or to extend the frontiers of the Islamic empire. No, it's not the case. These wars, if they can be called wars, they were actually acts of God's punishment. They were divine punishment which were given by God through his messengers. And this was, of course, a part of a greater law, and that is that at times God gave this punishment in the form of natural disasters. So the nations of Ad and Samud and the Prophet Lot, all of them suffered those natural disasters when they intentionally denied the message of God. Remember the word intentionally. So in some cases, this punishment takes place through these natural calamities, and in other cases, it takes place through the swords of the disbelievers. So basically, it was God's scourge, it was God's punishment, which was implemented on people who had intentionally, deliberately, not out of any confusion, not out of any misconception, but knowingly and arrogantly, they said that we will not accept. So they were basically punished. So I've just given you a very brief answer in a nutshell that that they should not be actually called wars the way we fight wars. Basically, they are God's punishment, which were implemented on these people either through natural disasters or in the form of war being conducted at the behest of God and His Prophet. You can read more about it in a lot of things that we have written, and we have a lot of spoken material as well on the YouTube. I think Ghazal will can refer you to that material. So this is how we view these wars. Okay, one question that I'd like to ask you is that does anyone remember if the surah that we studied is a Meccan surah or a Medinan surah?
It's a Madinan Surah.
Okay, so how do we know it's a Medinan surah? Any clues that make us remember the fact that a surah is a Meccan surah or a Medinan surah is something that is evident from the context, from the content of the surah. Yes, Sine, go ahead.
Because it addresses the hypocrites who were amongst the Muslims.
So one of the reasons is that these hypocrites who were originally from the Jews and they had infiltrated amongst the Muslims, of course. But you see, remember that basically the punishment which is talked about regarding the Jews is that is always something which took place in Medina. Look at the verses which say that people were migrating to Medina. Look at the verses in the surah which just say that when people had come to Medina, they were given that war booty, the war which actually never took place when the attack was on the Banu Nazir. And they were coming from Mecca, and one of the heads of that was that that booty or those spoils of war were distributed amongst them. Similarly, you find those Jewish tribes being they actually inhabited Medina. They never existed in Mecca. So you see, there are a lot of intrinsic signs from within the surah which tell us that basically it's a Medinan surah. Anyone remembers that which chapter of the Quran this is?
Chapter number 6.
That's very good, Muhammad Ahmed. So this is chapter number 6. And does anyone remember that how many chapters do we have in the Quran? How many what are the total chapters in the Quran?
7 chapters.
Okay,
7
so
chapters.
this is Abdul Rafi and Muhammad Tanveer both speaking at the same time. We have 7 chapters. That's very good, excellent. And does anyone know that if what is the arrangement in a particular chapter regarding the Meccan and the Medinan surahs? Which of them come first, and which of them follow actually? For example, we're studying the 6th chapter, which is chapter that you just one of the surah that you just studied belongs to the 6th chapter. So, so how does the chapter begin? Does it begin with the Meccan surah or with the Medinan surah, or what is the general pattern in this regard?
The chapter started with the Meccan surah and end with the Madani surah.
Absolutely correct. So a chapter will always begin with one or more than one Meccan surah and always end with one or more than one Medinan surah. So that's very well done. Okay, thank you very much, my dear friends and participants. Inshallah, we'll be back next Sunday with a new surah. I hope you are enjoying Ramadan. try to make the best out of the time that you have. See you, inshallah, next Sunday. So it is bye bye and Khuda Hafiz from your teacher.